Today we're continuing our study of the book of Daniel, a study I've titled, Our God is Able. But firstly, I'd like to take a quick look at the sign of our times. We live in a time of humanism, instability, war, false prophets and false Christs. The rejection of God's rule, which started from man in the Garden of Eden, seems to be reaching a frenzied pitch. Humanity is determined to prove that we can rule the world in an orderly, meaningful way without God. We assert that the ultimate purpose of everything is the glory and exaltation of humanity. This human-centered mania not only makes us refuse to submit to the rule of God, but also renders us incapable of submitting. Because humanity rejects the rule of God, our pride drives us to do things opposite to what God has ordained. God ordained capital punishment for murderers, but humanity tries to abolish it. God demands justice in society with the protection of the innocent and the punishment of the criminal, but humanity pampers the criminal at the expense of the innocent. God made mankind to have true meaning and purpose of life only in Him, but humanity tries to find true meaning in drugs, alcohol, the occult, materialism, philosophy, astrology, sex, cults, meditation, fame and power. God regards human life as valuable because He created it in His image, but we destroy it through abortion by the millions. God declares that the fear of the Lord is the starting point of wisdom, but we forbid any reference to God in the classroom. God instituted moral absolutes to govern mankind, but humanity says that utopia can only come through the rejection of these absolutes. God ordained distinctive appearances and roles for the sexes, but we try to obliterate those distinctions. God instituted sex to be used within the bonds of male-female marriage, but humanity perverts sex through pornography, fornication, adultery, and homosexuality. God instituted marriage and ordained that it be permanent, but humanity divorces and replaces marriages with de facto unions. God ordained the family as the nurturing place of future generations, but man does everything he can to undermine the importance of traditional families. We have our false prophets in Christ to encourage us in our rebellious attempts at self-rule. These deceivers tell mankind that we are good and perfectible by nature. They teach that through the process of evolution, humanity is moving towards divinity. Some so-called theologians declare that in order to have utopia, we must acclaim ourselves divine, that the true gospel is the good news that humanity is deified. Having willfully rejected the truth about God, humanity is worshipping and serving ourselves rather than our Creator. I've probably offended a lot of you, but at least I've got your attention. I was actually quoting Dr. Ronald Showers from his commentary on Daniel, called The Most High God, published way back in 1982. To me, these words still ring true of our current broken world, these times of the Gentiles we live in. What a mess we've made of things. Are we coming to the end of the time of the Gentiles as the Bible predicts? Last study, we saw that God had given Nebuchadnezzar a dream that spoke of 4 great kingdoms, which spanned from Daniel's day till the time of the second coming of Jesus. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome part 1, followed by Rome part 2, represented by the 10 toes. Of all the magi of Babylon, only Daniel, servant of the true God, could reveal the king's terrifying dream, a dream that laid out a period of time that Jesus described in Luke 21 as the times of the Gentiles. We're still waiting to see how the 10 toes part of this prophecy plays out. These 10 toes are still in our future. But Nebuchadnezzar has other ideas. He doesn't like the concept of a multi-metallic image. Let's read from Daniel chapter 3 verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, and King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. We're not specifically told this, but it seems almost certain this image was of Nebuchadnezzar himself. The king had conquered the world and realized that no power on earth had been able to stand before his onslaught. Therefore, he proclaimed himself as God, since no one in heaven or earth could stand before him. In the last chapter, he had a dream of a multi-metallic image. Daniel had revealed to him that he was the head of gold. But now the king built not just a head of gold, but an entire massive image of gold from head to toes. It seems he wasn't satisfied with being just the head. He wanted it all. How could his empire be replaced, since he was the King of Kings and the conqueror of all other gods? He had proven no god could stand against him. He was all-powerful. Surely all the world should be worshipping, not these weak gods, but me, thought the king. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Only a madman could believe these instructions reasonable, but Nebuchadnezzar was drunk on power. What we have here is enforced state religion, as seen in Revelation 13 and 14 and in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 4. A prophetic analogy is quite clearly being built up in these events. As an interesting side note, verse 6, the word immediately comes from an Aramaic word literally meaning that very hour. This is the first time in the Bible we find the division of time into hours. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." The 3 Jewish young men had been promoted to senior positions very early in their career. The jealousy of the native wise men comes to the fore. This is their chance to get rid of these Jews. The Aramaic word translated as accused in verse 8 can also be translated eat the flesh of. These Chaldeans were like vultures picking at a carcass, or cackling hyenas salivating over a fresh kill. Verse 12, "There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up." And although these jealous men had a clear agenda, their witness was true. These 3 Jews did not worship the image, because the powerful words of Scripture, which they had memorized as young boys, was upon their hearts. "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them." This story provides a clear and simple warning to each of us. Anyone who serves faithfully the living God will face trials. If you serve Jesus, your enemy is the world, the devil, and his demons. Expect to confront opposition. Expect to confront your own cackling hyenas. The success of your faith will be on the basis of how tightly you cling to Jesus. Will you stand with God, or will you fall with the world? Most people will bow to external pressures and quickly compromise their internal convictions in the rush to conform. Christians are called to hold strong to godly convictions, no matter the external pressures. Verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? The king had gone to great lengths to indoctrinate these young men. 3 years training in Babylon's finest schools. Then he fast-tracked them to senior positions. Surely there's been some sort of mistake. Tell me that you'll worship my image. Verse 15. Now if you are ready, at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre and psaltery and symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately, this very hour, into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? He dares to ask. The king has already seen a glimpse of the power of the God of the Jews, the revealer of dreams. Your God may be able to reveal dreams, but he can't handle me and my total power over life and death. After all, I went to Jerusalem, the home of your God, and destroyed his temple, and he was powerless to stop me. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. These are 3 of the bravest men in history. The king's question hanging over them as a death threat. Who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Their mighty reply. Our God, O king, is able to deliver us, and he will deliver us. But even if he doesn't, we will not worship your golden image. You see, the confidence of being on God's side instills in these young men. Our God is able. Let the people of Sydney, let the people of Australia, let the people of the world declare, by the way we live, the Christians on this earth, that our God is able. He's always been a God of deliverance. We may burn, but we will never bow. Verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. With fury and rage exuding from every pore in his body, the king flexes the full extent of his human power, stokes the furnace to 7 times its usual intensity, and instructs his most powerful mighty men to bind them and cast them into the burning, fiery furnace. Verse 21, then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And this is where the story should have finished and would have finished if it were not for the power of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the same God that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego worship. For the record, the same God that we today, the followers of Jesus Christ, worship. Verse 24, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. The king was astonished. I think all the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. His blood ran cold. He had goosebumps all over his body, and a shuddering tingle went down his spine. Those men are loose, unaffected by the fire and walking about. And I'm fairly certain I threw 3 men into the fire, but look, I see 4 men in the fire. And the 4th man is like the Son of God. Who is this 4th man? Verse 26, then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego came from the midst of the fire. These 3 men refused to bow, and the 4th man in the fiery furnace refused to let them burn. These men were happy to remain in the fire where they were in the presence of this mysterious 4th man. It's only when the king spoke with humanity that they left the physical presence of the 4th man and the fiery furnace. Verse 27, and the satraps, administrators, governors, the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men, on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. Other than the furnace fuel, only 2 things burned in that fiery furnace. Firstly, the king's mighty men who bound the 3 Jews. They would have bowed before the golden image. These mighty men were consumed by the flames. This is an ironic truth, which is truth for all time. If you bow to the world or false religion or the worship of self, you'll burn. But if you stand tall alongside the 4th man, you'll never burn. The only other thing that burned were the bindings that the worldly king placed on these 3 faithful men. And if we're faithful to the true King of Kings, any earthly bindings we might suffer for following him will be a distant memory once we enter into glory. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. This evil king finally confronts the living God, and he is shocked. He thought he'd seen it all. He declares rightful praise to the God of heaven and these 3 men who are faithful servants of God. The statement, and yielded their bodies, is a very literal demonstration of what Paul wrote about 600 years later in Romans 12, God's instruction to each of us. Romans 12, verse 1, I beseech you therefore, brethren, Christians of the world, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. What a powerful command to God, from God to us. Do we live this, or just give God lip service? Now back to the words of the king. Verse 29, therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego in the province of Babylon. You see, Nebuchadnezzar had conquered all before him. He'd smashed all gods, but he'd never confronted power like this before. And he finally has the answer to his question, who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? There is no other God who can deliver like this.